This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, fantasy book fans? This is Steven, your host with Fantology Podcast, along with my lifelong friends, Jake and Josh. And to be honest, we were not planning on recording anything today, but then the internet blew up, at least in the fantasy book corner of the world that we occupy, with this Wired article that came down pretty hard on Brandon Sanderson. So we thought we would kind of give our reaction since we've been stewing on it and chatting about it all day. So if you're not aware, well, actually, do you guys want to jump in with anything there on that intro before I just explain what it is briefly?
You're good. Yeah, I think you're good.
Feeling okay? Feeling like do we have a rant coming? Possibly. Well, I guess we'll see.
Josh is on the call, so yes, there's a rant coming.
Yeah, we've got the Josh rant queued up, ready to go. So stick around for that. But before we get started, a word from our sponsor. So if you're not aware what we're talking about, there's an article that came out in Wired today. It's Thursday, March 23rd. And it was written by an author that spent some time with Brandon back in November. A journalist, we should say. Yeah. Sorry. A journalist. Yeah, not a journalist for Wired, like one of their senior journalists over there.
It said senior editor. I don't know the org structure.
Yeah, we don't want to assume too much of.
Josh is so ready.
Yeah.
No, I'm calmed down. I've calmed down a lot.
His name's Jason Kahey, I think. And I mean, we don't want to assume too much about what's going on. All we really know is what was written in the article. So to kind of briefly summarize, he spent some time with Brandon and his family. He went to Dragonsteel Con back in November. That I was actually at as well, and noticed that I was in several of the same panels that he was in. And the premise of this whole article was that basically Sanderson, because his prose is not amazing, he's not a good author. Like, in his own words, he tries to say that Brandon admits that he's not a good author, and the
not good at writing. He says not good at writing.
Okay,
not good at writing. Writer.
Sure.
To be, I mean, I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know what to say here. No. What I'm going to say
if you agree that Sanderson's not the greatest at prose, like that isn't what I'm going to say. I feel like that's fine.
What I'm going to say is like you saying that was the point of the article. It's really hard to tell what the point of the article is.
There wasn't really a point of the article.
Yeah, so that is anything he says.
I feel like he hits on that enough where that's like one of the attempts he makes to be coherent.
This article is really hard to summarize. It's really hard to get the thesis from, which makes it, in my opinion, not a great article, because I think he says Sanderson writes at a 6th grade level. I think that this article kind of feels like it was written at a 6th grade level in some ways because of those things. Like, there's really not like I don't know. There's maybe a narrative throughout the article, but no real thesis in the article. I think we'll have like some sort of link, or go find it. We're not going to go line by line. Daniel Green did a really good job on his Twitch stream, which is now a VOD on YouTube, on going line by line and giving his like raw reaction to it. We'll
link you to Daniel.
Maybe
Green's
we'll link
article.
you to Daniel.
Yeah, and we'll link to some Reddit posts that have that Brandon's actually responded with. But yeah, like you say, it's really hard to get what the thesis of the article is. The things that he hits on was like Brandon is not a good writer. He tries really hard. He plays really hard into the LDS Mormon angle. I thought it was fairly but
what even angle did he use on that? The article kept mentioning what Brandon's religion is, but then not going into detail about why that's pertinent in any way. Like,
the furthest he went was at the end. He gets into the LDS doctrine of becoming exalted like a god, and he tries to like get to this point that Sanderson is like living his fantasy and being this like ultimate Mormon like
god
he's being his own god right now in his writing. Like, it was really strange. It was like this strange thing
he hits on that once offensive. but he kept mentioning the fact that he's Mormon without it's like he mentions, oh yeah, he's Mormon, as if like everyone should know that that's weird, without like going like, it's like insinuating that it's weird.
He straight up calls him a weirdo Mormon. Like that's a quote from the article.
But and so like that's like the way, the context he's using it, but he doesn't go into like why he thinks that's weird. There's no like analysis or like support to it. It's just like, it's like, yeah, default, everyone knows that because he's Mormon, he must be a weirdo. And then like there's, like you said, there's a little bit of a connection back to like what he's talking about in the article at the end, but throughout it's like, it's just like it's almost like he's dropping these like hot keywords to get like attention without giving any substance to them. It's just like, oh, there's this, there's this, there's this. And it's like, okay, what are you trying to say with this? Like how does this support anything you're trying to say here?
Along with very personal, like just insulting attacks, like regardless of like religion and stuff, or even the fact that he might not think Sanderson's a very good writer or author. He'll also just like insult Brandon Sanderson's appearance and like describe the clothes that he's wearing, and that they're not like fitted well, or that they don't make him appear like in a very good light. He talks about how Sanderson just kind of rambles on and is very enthusiastic, but doesn't make any good points, which like, again, these are all like somewhat valid points in certain ways if you wanted to narrow in on it. And
like,
like,
it's not cohesive.
But it's not like, there's a lot of things in it. Like, could it be an issue for some people that Brandon Sanderson is Mormon? Yeah. Like, he might contribute like funds to the church, which people then might not like what the church does with those funds. Like, there's a very valid criticism that a lot of thoughtful people have made about why that's an issue for them and why they won't read Brandon Sanderson because of that. Like, that's fine, you know. Like, but
he doesn't go into those details. He just like drops like drop these hot phrases. There's a lot of people that there's a lot of people that like don't like reading Sanderson because he feels YA, or because of his prose, or because he has like a weird sense of humor, or because there's not great representation
he's not good at metaphors. He actually doesn't even mention the sense of humor. If he mentioned that the sense of humor was not as good, I would give the article more credit.
It would go from a 0 point to a 1 point for Stephen. But like, okay, but bottom line, there's like a reason why, there's plenty of valid reasons about Sanderson's writing why people wouldn't want to read Sanderson. And those, like, there's plenty of great arguments. Like, it seems like there's a weekly post on Reddit that makes a lot of good arguments about why Sanderson's overhyped or overrated, or not the greatest author in the world. Like, there's plenty of good and valid points to make about that. There's plenty of good and valid points to make about how Sanderson just kind of talks at length about things that he doesn't know a lot about on his podcasts. Like, I like listening to Intentionally Blank and Sometimes Writing Excuses, because I like personally think that Brandon and Dan are like pretty entertaining a lot of the time. But again, like, I get why that would be grating for some people. Like, all of these are valid things that you could form like a hit piece around and have it be like a perfectly valid quote unquote hit piece. But like, he doesn't take the time to make any of these arguments. He just will like Jake's saying, drop hints at them and then move on without providing any support. Sort of examples. No support to his, no clear cohesive argument, no support to the like little arguments that are brought up. And this is like me, I think I'm probably like the most critical of Brandon Sanderson out of us five. And I'll admit, the article brings up, like you're saying, valid criticisms of him. I do think his prose is lackluster. I think I mean, the humor wasn't brought up, but like some of the writing is pretty bad. Oh, the word choice specifically, I've noticed that in Brandon's writings, like he'll throw maladroitly in there, like overdone in the Mistborn trilogy. It's like this simultaneous, like really simple to read thing, and then all of a sudden like a word that feels like it came straight from the thesaurus, it just doesn't jive. Like, I think these are valid criticisms, but it doesn't go into like any like clear, like, what is your objective here other than to just rant about things that you don't like without like supporting why like it's important. So, and the weird thing to me is that, honestly, reading through the whole article, it almost felt like it's meant to be this like, I'm pulling a switcheroo on you, I'm going to list all the reasons why, like all these critiques against Brandon Sanderson, and then in the last paragraph go into, but here's why he's actually great and those things don't matter. It almost feels like it has that structure,
but it's done so poorly because if that's what they're trying to go for, it gets like weirdly mean and personal. So like the switcheroo doesn't work, and it doesn't go into enough detail of like a strong, like focused, these are these criticisms, and this is why his strengths outweigh the criticisms, like, so I don't know. I honestly don't know what's
he wasn't trying to do a switcher.
But like
I
the
think
structure
Jake
feels like that.
Jake was
right?
thinking
Right?
like you were reading it and you were like, what is this? So you were expecting
Yeah.
maybe something quality at the end, but it never happened.
Well, it's because the last paragraph, he almost contradicts himself by saying, but sentences don't make good stories, and like kind of focuses on the fact that Brandon Sanderson is a good storyteller. And so it's almost like he counteracted all his criticisms from before about all the prose stuff when he says sentences don't make stories. So like what? So like what is
okay?
What is the point of the article?
Here's my thing, Jake. He doesn't go into any details on any of these criticisms because he's writing for Wired. He's not making a Reddit post on like our fantasy that people want to read. He wants to like write an interesting piece that people that don't care about Brandon Sanderson or about fantasy will like read and engage with, and like going into details about why Sanderson isn't a great prose author or about any of these other things we talked about. People are going to click off of that really fast unless they're like deep into like epic fantasy culture.
Well, no, I think like if his point was either the switcheroo, which makes no sense, or his point
it's not
was
the switcheroo, man.
Oh no, I agree. That doesn't make any sense. But it's either that or his point was to like basically say Brandon doesn't deserve where he's at, and he's like reveling in his fame. That's what I got was. And if that's the point, if that's the point of it, it needed to be more like specific and concise so people can read like, oh yeah, he's this author, but he lacks these skills. Let's like go into this and why this is an issue. But it's counterproductive throughout the whole article.
But he's writing in Wired. People that he's writing, his audience doesn't care about like those issues. They just want to hear about this like super successful author that's pretty weird. Like that's all. That's the point of the article. Is like here's this really successful article or author that's like not actually a great author, and he's very eccentric.
But he doesn't even go into, he doesn't like give enough detail or support to the eccentricities.
I think he does.
I don't think it does.
In some ways, like you're like,
I think he creates a picture of a bunch of kind of like weird abnormal things, and he throws in a bunch of details, but he never like connects it with any kind of connecting tissue between it. That's like, oh, like this, point 1, point 2, point 3. Therefore, we see the thesis of the main thing, right?
Yeah, he just wrote notes of, here's some weird things I thought about him. Now let's write an article, and he just hit on everything in his notes instead of writing it.
Some of the words are
an essay.
Like some of the details are completely unrelated. Like he says he has a parrot whose name is it escapes me right now, but like that has nothing to do with anything. He's just like writing down his notes. And the thing that bugged me the most is it's just so mean-spirited throughout. Like he says maybe 2 or 3 positive things the whole time. The most positive thing he says is about the shower in the guest room, which but like he insults Sanderson a lot. He insults his family. He insults everyone that works at Dragonsteel. He insults basically like everyone in the fantasy community in Utah, who he clearly considers to be some kind of like backwater thing. And I mean, he insults nerds in general. Like everyone who went to the convention, he says that people smelled bad. They had swords that had names, which he implies is stupid. Like the whole thing is just this hate piece, not only against Sanderson, but against the whole community, like against all of his fans. And that's what really just rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah. And that's, if I'm just like, so like dumbstruck by it, because it just makes no sense. Like, regardless of what you think it's like the purpose of the article, like it doesn't execute any of it well. Like if you read just the last paragraph, you might think, oh, this article is in favor of Brandon Sanderson. Little weird, like what it's like, how it's ending. But then if you read the whole thing, it's like you said, it's so mean-spirited to like end like that. And I don't know if it was just like, okay, I have to like balance it out a bit or what. And like, I don't know. And like, it brings up like the Greatest Showman thing. Like he hates the Greatest Showman. Like, like, okay. Like,
yeah. So weird.
what? Like, what is the point of this?
He talks about how he broke down in tears, implying that like he couldn't take it anymore because this whole experience was so terrible and stupid. And seeing the Greatest Showman in Sanderson's theater room was like the crowning jewel on his terrible experience. It's very strange.
Like I said, it just, regardless of what it might have tried to accomplish, it was done in such like incohesive, meandering, just like how did this get published? I don't know. And like you're saying, Josh, if it's before Wired, just like, hey, let's focus on this weird eccentric person. Well, like go into detail on how they are eccentric. Don't just like skim the surface. And like, why would someone of Wired, if they don't care about fantasy books at all or Brandon Sanderson, why would they care to know that an author is eccentric? Like, I just don't understand what this point was.
So here's the
furthermore, why is it so clearly negative and repulsive to this guy to be eccentric?
So
he's simultaneously, sorry, Josh, he's simultaneously saying he's weird and eccentric while also saying he's bland. That's like something else that comes across.
Yeah,
like,
he's like there's nothing beneath the surface. I had nothing to write about after talking to him for so long.
Yeah,
he gave me nothing interesting. While he continues to list off like really unique, weird things about him,
or normal things he's trying to make sound weird. Yeah.
Or
sorry, like having a parrot. Like that's a little bit weird. But I had parrots growing up. Like my family had parrots. I kind of want one. Like it's not that weird. Like it's a little bit weird, but it's not like crazy. So here's the last paragraph, and I think it does summarize a kind of a weird. I don't know. I'll read it because you've referenced it, Jake. I suspect there will be big announcements soon. There have to be. Sanderson is bigger than ever. A good writer? Who knows? What do I know now is this, or what I do know now is this. So many of us mistake sentences for story, but story is the thing. Things happen. Characters changing. Surprise endings. As I drive back to the house, drop off the kid, meaning Sanderson's kid, and then stay in the car with Sanderson a bit longer, talking about life, talking about worlds, my ending takes shape. The surprise is that it was Sanderson's ending all along, the ending of his best books. The character becomes a god, and the god beholds his planet below. If Sanderson is a writer, that is all he is doing. He is living his fantasy of godhood on Earth. It like even that paragraph is just so like rambly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it starts off with like there may be an announcement about an adaptation coming.
Well, I think that paragraph was fine. Like he's building up to saying, okay, Sanderson's getting bigger and bigger, and what he sees himself as is a god, which is like the biggest thing that you could possibly be, right? So I think the paragraph makes sense, and I do think like there is some cohesive point there, Jake. Like if you were to just read that paragraph,
just read that,
like you were saying, like none of the previous. It's like he throws out everything he wrote before, and like this is what he's settling on. But at the same time, everything he wrote before was just really mean and insulting.
And in the paragraph before, will they ever make a big movie version of one of your books? Ask him in the fairy garden. Sanderson makes meaningful noises. Even though your systems of magic seem unfilmably complex, more meaningful noises. It's like, that's just so, it's like dehumanizing to just refer to really somebody's answer as meaningless noises. When we've all heard Sanderson talk about like potential adaptations, and he like gives good insights about how options work in Hollywood. And,
well, clearly what Sanderson was doing was trying to like indicate that yes, things are coming, but I can't necessarily talk about them.
Right.
It's like, why would you not just say that rather than act like he's an idiot with his response?
Yeah.
So if this were like, if this article wanted to be actually engaging and like worthwhile, something you could bring up is like he critiques his prose a lot, and I think it's
which is a valid criticism.
Yeah, I think that's a valid criticism. I think, like I said, a lot of things he brings up are valid criticisms if you actually go into them. So if you wanted to focus on the prose and then you still wanted to end it with, but like sentences don't make a story, then like compare and contrast how prose contributes to storytelling, but isn't the whole thing in storytelling. So dive into like Sanderson has been like really open on saying like he views himself more as a storyteller than an author. And then so like the article could dive into, well, if you want to be a storyteller, you have to tell a story through a medium, and he's choosing the medium of being an author and writing, and how prose plays into that. Like that could be a really interesting article, you know, like how like Sanderson's philosophy of I want the prose to be
I just
enough for people to engage and like get into the story versus and contrast that to someone who's like, no, I want the prose to be the art itself. And like that could be an interesting article.
Yeah,
right.
I just don't. I don't think that that's the point of the art. I think the point of the article.
It's not like that's not a wired audience article.
Yeah, the point of the article is to try and give people an insight into this eccentric Mormon author that's also huge. Like that's the point of the article.
No, I get that's the point, but that this could be like what I just said could be an article focused on that, and have that be like the main part of the thesis, showing like, hey, this guy's really popular and eccentric, but this doesn't make sense that he's popular for these reasons, and then like debate that out throughout the article.
Yeah, I guess.
And you could do the same thing. Like he kind of like hints that there's lots of nepotism going on with Brandon Sanderson. They could have like dived into that. Like, what's the difference between starting a family company and then turning into something that's too much of nepotism? Like,
I think that's I think that's what he was kind of trying to hope to find. But then when he went, he didn't find any of that. You know what I mean? Like, maybe there's some nepotism, but also he employs like a lot of people, and he's written like blog posts and stuff about how he pays them all like a living wage, not just minimum wage, and he treats them really well.
That's what the article should have been about. Then
that's not what he wanted. That's not what he wanted to write about. He didn't want to go there and write about.
He didn't want to point out anything
made
positive.
A lot of money. Like
you could point out the negatives of that if you wanted to be negative. Like he could have like still done a negative or a critical article. You know what I mean? Like,
you're right. A critical article would have been good about going into, but he didn't want to write a critical article. He wanted to write a hit.
It seems like hit pieces are critical.
No, a critical article like goes in with like looking for valid criticisms. And like, when I think about like critically approaching something, I think about going in with an open mind, wanting to find the good parts and the bad parts. He didn't want to do that.
I meant critical, like he's being critical of Sanderson. Fair. And you could still make a hit piece, have actual critical thinking behind it. He just chose not to. Like plenty of Reddit posts like are quote unquote hit pieces, but they're actually like thinking critically about like important stuff. And Sanderson usually has meaningful responses to those like Reddit posts a lot of the time. Yeah. Or like they provide good debates. Like, so why talk about an author at all in Wired?
Because he okay, this
is just the Kickstarter thing?
I don't know. Here's what I think happened. He hears about this $50 million Kickstarter. He knows that Sanderson's pretty weird, you know.
He's read all the books, allegedly.
Well, he claims to have read 17 or maybe 20 of the books. The number doesn't matter.
And he keeps dropping hits like, I know who Nightblood is, or I like Kaladin, you know, like.
And I could see maybe like he was a big, I think a lot of people are big fans of Sanderson, and then they like go read other fantasy and they're like, oh dang, Sanderson wasn't all that great. Like, so that maybe that happened to him, right? Maybe he read a bunch of Sanderson 10 years ago, and then he read Joel Abercrombie and he's like, oh dang, Joel Abercrombie is now my favorite author. You know what I mean? And I'm never going to read another Sanderson book. Like people do that, you know? But I think here's my narrative of what I think must have happened. Here's this $50 million Kickstarter. You got the angle of a rich multi-millionaire. So automatically, you know, people are going to be predisposed not to like him. He's a weird religion. Great. You know, he's probably like fundamentalist in that. We can, you know, go into that and talk about how weird that is when we go. Like, let me go convince my editor to fly me out, and I'm going to go stay with him. I'm going to dig into all these really weird things. I'm going to like go to this huge nerd convention and see a bunch of really weird things. Then we come back, I'm going to have like all this ammunition to write like this, you know, expose about, you know, this eccentric author, you know what I mean? And you just didn't get that. So he still tried to write that.
I don't buy that, because he harps on so much how bland Sanderson is. And also like nerd culture is like so mainstream now that like Comic-Con, FanX, like that kind of stuff is so mainstream why would anyone expect to go to a convention thinking I'm going to get some good stuff to write about
but
here?
why?
He still tried to write it. He still tried to write that article.
If he didn't believe that, why did he insult nerd culture and everyone that went to the con?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what he's trying to do, because
He was trying to do
the
that.
article doesn't make sense.
That's why, like, I think I agree with a lot of Josh's.
He was trying to go find like a
theory here.
He was trying to go find like a culty, like weird gathering, of 5,000 people who are worshiping Sanderson like some sort of god. He's like, oh yeah, you went and go.
Okay.
Yeah, you go.
But he only touches on that like a couple times
because people were normal there.
But I mean, like, and again, this isn't a critique of your argument. This is a critique again of the article that is so aimless and unfocused that like this may have been the main purpose of the article, but it is not. Like, I feel like he talks more about Sanderson's lack of good writing skills than he does focus in on the godlike following and that kind of stuff.
Because he couldn't. He went and he couldn't find anything interesting enough to support what he wanted to do. So
if that's what happens and you're a writer, then it's like, okay, that's not the story. What is the story? Then
there was no story.
The story is.
That's why there wasn't a story in the article.
Well, I know, but he touched. But what I'm saying is he touched on so many like different disconnected things that could have been their own stories and didn't do any of it.
Did you read Sanderson's response, Jake? Did you read his Reddit post?
Yeah,
that's basically what he said. He was like, he was coming hoping to find a story, and this is what Sanderson said. And
Sanderson saying he assumes that that's what he was doing now, because
he's approaching it pretty right. But he's approaching it pretty charitably, in my opinion. Right, like he came hoping to find a story, and he didn't really find one, so he wrote a bunch of like mean.
Yeah, but I know you're assuming that was the main story, but I'm saying he talks so much about other things too that it's hard to know what exactly his original goal was, because everything is so disconnected in the article.
I think it's pretty apparent what his original goal is.
Well, his biggest critique is the writing, the fact that he's popular without the writing skills.
Because I don't think he went and found enough good examples of like weird eccentric behavior to make that to pull in a ton of examples of that. So he pulled in a ton of examples of poor writing.
I mean, clearly the writing thing was something
that's
like, clearly that was part of the story. Like that was going to be part of the story that he wanted to write, because he said when he went to the con, he kept on asking people like, oh, you like Brandon Sanderson, what do you think of his writing? And he tries to get people to like respond to that loaded question of his writing is not good.
Because I think that this is when he was expecting to see like this godlike cult like, irrationality of being able to critique Sanderson. Instead, people are like, oh yes, his prose.
Maybe, but how is that something people are more interested in Wired than the author, like the writing itself?
Because that's an interesting narrative.
You're saying that people reading a tech magazine like Wired don't want to hear about an author's prose, but you're saying, of course, they want to hear about someone wanting to be a god. Like that doesn't.
Yeah, that's way more interesting.
But neither one of those things has to do with Wired at all, or technology.
Being a god is definitely more interesting than prose.
Well, no, I get that, but your argument that it couldn't have been, his main focus couldn't have been about prose, because that's not something Wired is connected to. Wired is not connected to people trying to build their own cults either.
I guess, but he's kind of like Wired. I went and looked at a bunch of articles. Like he writes articles like why the Matrix reboot was like was bound to fail, or like finally we'll give a definitive ranking of the Star Wars, movies and stuff. So he is kind of like
more culture.
Wired's interface with culture,
and like the
Verge
nerd.
So if he's talking about culture, then I think the writing thing still applies, especially because he had interviews of people talking about how transformative Sanderson's writing was on their life, helping them become better. And there's the story right there. Talk about, maybe like
that was
talk
an
about
excuse
the critique
to talk about how weird that person was, though.
No,
like
I think it connects back to the whole storytelling aspect of like, okay, the prose is weak. People like the stories. That's the disconnect. That's like the juxtaposition there. And that's those anecdotes fed into that. And I feel like in the last paragraph, when he talks about like, but the stories end in these ways, that touches back on that stuff too, like those people's experiences. That's a good story, and that's a culture-worthy story.
I think it's weird that with a tech magazine, he wouldn't bring up the whole Audible thing that
Yeah,
Sanderson is.
That's
a
I mean,
really
that's-
relevant tech thing.
That should have been like, if you're talking like the theme of Wired, it should have been talking about his company, the Kickstarter, and how it affects Audible and
He didn't
publishing
mention it
industries.
at all. There
But
was
because
there
I
were
think-
zero words about Audible.
But I think because that would be I mean, again, like, I don't want to be like, ragging on this guy, but I think that would be something that a lot of people would be like, dang, Sanderson's like watching out for the little guy. He's trying to like not pull the ladder up behind him.
That sells.
But that's not the point. That's not the point of that. I don't know, man. It's weird. It's weird.
I know you're saying he wanted to write a hit piece, but a good writer would go out wanting to write a hit piece, get the information, and see, oh, that's not the story.
You're right.
That's not the best story. That's
a good
here.
journalist would do that. A good journalist
Like,
would do
have
that.
you seen Inventing Anna? Did you guys watch Inventing Anna?
Yeah.
Like, I'm imagining her like she's like getting more of the story and like piecing it together and like building the best story that is actually here. And we talked about 2 or 3 other stories that were here that he definitely could have written about, and instead it's just rambling critiques.
But Jake, you read the article. Given the mean-spirited and frankly like thinly veiled bigotry present throughout, like, do you think this guy honestly went in with an open mind of this is the story I'm trying to write? Like, I don't think so. I think he wanted to. He wanted to write this, like,
who hurt
inflammatory.
him?
Yeah, like there is. I don't know. There's something here. Like he has something like against organized religion, against Mormonism, against something. I don't know.
I don't think it's specifically. I think it's more against Sanderson than those are like tangentially those are related, but those aren't like the main point of the critique.
Like he sees Sanderson as someone he just does not like at all.
Yeah, for whatever reason, he was like,
again, I think it's because he was expecting to go get this weird cult leader like vibe from Sanderson. Instead, he got like this bland, enthusiastic guy. Because
I don't know why he would have thought that's what he'd get from
come on, man, like
all the public things out there from Sanderson. There's so much out there already of him, and none of that tracks.
Because you could paint a picture of that pretty easily. Here's this convention, 5,000 people strong. I'm going to go interview people that are going to refuse to say anything negative at all about him, and then I'm going to go tour this like weird cult complex that he has, and make that look really eerie. And instead it's like, oh, here's a cool like home theater system that he has set up in his basement with a nice shower for guests to use when they come.
I understand you saying that's the point. It just doesn't make sense, because even if that were the point, like, he knows Sanderson has a podcast. He knows he's like very open with fans, and like that just is not part. Like, it's not like he's like, oh, who is the real Sanderson? Like, who is this person Jake, that's so hidden behind like mystery? He's completely open out there.
Based off of what Brandon said about when this guy Jason came, he was really friendly, and Sanderson said he wasn't like other journalists who maintain this like air of professionalism. This guy was really friendly. Like he was maybe trying too hard to be his friend almost. And he talks about how he was like, or Sanderson doesn't, in the article, he mentions that he was like messing around with his kid, playing jokes on people who were coming up to talk to Brandon. So it seems like he's almost like this wolf in sheep's clothing, coming to be like, I'm your friend. I'm going to like uncover your secrets and, dig deep into what's really going on here. And
I guess my point on paper,
I just don't get the motivation. But like, it doesn't make any sense.
It's a good dude on paper. It's a really compelling, like, here's somebody that you can totally like on paper paint this weird narrative of. That's this really weird eccentric guy who has this like complex in the middle of Utah and has this devoted cult like following around him. Like, you can't tell me that on paper you're like, I can go out and
especially because
there's examples of this.
There's been a lot of really popular stories about cults in Utah that a lot of people, have watched on TV, and like it's a popular thing recently. Like Josh says, that story really tracks.
He doesn't hit on that enough if that was his real point.
Because there was no story there.
Because it doesn't exist.
But that argument is circular. The fact that this was his point, but he didn't talk about it because there wasn't evidence
Josh is
for
saying,
the point.
Josh is saying that's what he was trying to do.
He was still trying to get
he couldn't find enough. So I guess he had to write the piece, and he was like, what am I going to do? And he kind of just threw it all together.
you think he'd focus? There's a way to. I could build a narrative like that. If that was his goal, I could build
I don't know,
a
man. Like
a
none
way
of
better
us
supported
understand
narrative than that.
the reason we're recording this right now is because none of us understand this super weird story that came out that was just inflammatory against a lot of things that
And just weird,
yeah.
weird personal days against
We should
Sanderson.
all. This should be, everyone who's listening should write your own version of this article where it actually has focus, is cohesive, makes sense. It can be positive.
Yeah.
It can be like supporting Sanderson, critiquing Sanderson. Just make it legit, and then we all like. This is what the article should have been.
All right, we're out of time. Any final words? I guess for me, I just hate this because I feel like it represents like the worst part of the internet. That's just inflammatory and negative. I hate stuff that's just like mean and negative for the sake of being mean and negative. And I guess it worked for Wired. Like they got a lot of clicks on this article, probably more than they usually do.
No,
We'll
Wired's a big publication, man. Like Wired goes viral all the time. Like they're not like this indie upstart that like needs clicks.
All right. Well, it went viral in our community, which doesn't usually happen with a typical Wired article. But yeah, like you say, maybe I don't know if it's any more than a usual story. We'll see if it works for them a lot. Like if I was someone that this guy wanted to interview in the future, like, no,
I'm not
going to do that.
Yeah. Why would anybody let this guy come interview them? Like, even if you just say bland vanilla things and then he's just going to attack your clothes. Like, yeah. All right.
That's a wrap. Hopefully that was coherent. I think
it's so unsatisfying, man.
I think that helps all of us. Just get that off our chest. We can turn the page. Hopefully it doesn't affect Brandon's writing too much. Honestly, if I was him, I'd be really upset and probably not write anything for like a week, because something like this would be hard for me to personally get over.
Yeah. So the fact that he like hung out with his family feels so dirty.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening. See you later.